anything less. I mean, going into this, I pretty much thought that's where you were at on that. But if you don't think people should be discriminated against on the basis of their sexual orientation, I mean, it seems like there's a straight line from there to saying that we should allow gay marriage, because
no,
we're not
not
discriminating on the basis of.
not for me. I mean, not for me. I think it's far more. I think the debate is far more nuanced. I think the considerations are not just, hey, here's two people that love each other and they want to get married. Like I look at I get the emotional appeal to that, but life is not just about emotional appeals, because any relational model can make emotional appeals to me that make me feel warm inside and be like, yeah, why would I not want that for them? There's a lot of relation.
Would you at least grant this, that if we generally accept the assumption that we should not make discriminate on the basis of sexual orientation, that creates a partial case, maybe not a completely convincing case, but a partial case in favor of allowing same-sex marriage?
I mean, certainly someone could use that as grounds for making that case. So, I mean, I don't deny that, you could have a whole host of different people using these things, to promote some sort of idea. I mean, and like I said, at the end of the day, and I think Prof asked a question, and I read a question again, and your question was really, it was a little bit more difficult than I thought. At first I thought it said one thing, and I read and it said something else, and then I was like, crap, I don't even know what the hell he just asked me. So you asked, would I vote against denying same-sex couples the right to marry? You couldn't have worded that a little bit easier. So if someone is wanting to deny same-sex couples the right to marry, so would I vote against same-sex marriage? Is that what you're...
Yes.
Okay. So
if I can, let's say that you do move back to Washington.
would I vote for a ban on same-sex marriage? At this point, I would not. And that's been my position for several years. It's been one of apathy towards the political situation. So, but I want to clarify though, okay? Because I know that people like that. I know my gay friends and my atheist friends are like, "Yay, Jack, at least you're not going to do anything about it. At least you're not going to vote." But in my mind, I'm like, that's great. I don't feel like I'm getting a pat on the back from anyone about that, because to be quite honest, at the end of the day, I think the fundamental realities of Christianity, as I believe people already know, is that it does take stances on moral issues that are not part of a secular society. And I think at the end of the day, there's always going to be this struggle for every person in some form or fashion with regards to how a pocket of that population views certain behaviors, whether the secular society grants them words, whatever labels they want. There's still going to be this reality that there are portions of the population that view certain behaviors not in a secular sense as being wrong, but certainly within a religious connotation as having implications.
Right. I mean, part of what that brings to my mind, again, obviously, since I'm not a member of a religious community, I have to sort of think of analogies. I've made several videos on the topic of eating meat, and that's something that I think is morally wrong. And people often ask me if I would outlaw that if possible. And even though I do think it is one of the morally most important issues, I would not outlaw eating meat. In part for similar reasons, because I don't think that it's healthy in a society for small minorities to impose their will on majorities. Barring certain limitations, there are certain circumstances when that is appropriate. So that is, to my mind, the closest thing that I can think of as an analogy. Yeah, I mean, as Mitch said, I am. I do appreciate the subtlety and the nuance and the thought, but ultimately, of course, I'm personally glad that you would not vote to ban gay marriage. I'm hopeful. Again, I don't mean to say I expect this or try to pressure you, but I'm hopeful that maybe we can even actually at some point convince you to vote in favor of gay marriage. But that might be a little much to ask for.
Yes, that would not, and the reason why is just because the word has too many connotations religiously.
Well, then perhaps civil unions then, if not.
Oh yeah, certainly. I mean, if for example, I was in a state that said, should we grant civil unions to people who are in monogamous relationships so that they don't have to jump through all these hurdles that's a secular, that secular society presents to them when going to the hospital or visitations? Of course, easily. I would easily say grant civil unions to people who want to live together in monogamous relationships, whether they're sexual or not. Give them civil unions. I think that's in the best interest of a society to promote monogamous, long-term relationship, whether it's sexual or not. That's important for society to have.
So then maybe to come full circle to back to what we started this whole conversation about, I mean, would you support a legal decision that's abolished the idea of civil marriage and replaced it entirely with some sort of civil union procedure or something like that?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, you vote in favor of that?
Oh yes, hands down. Because at that point things become a lot more comfortable in terms of the separation between religion and the state. Right, and this is the challenge with our society. I mean, this is the challenge of language itself, is that it's bound to be, there are going to be words that cross over from the religious sphere to the secular sphere, and no one knows which way they're going, But if we can limit the sort of overlap, then I think it can be, in this case, as we've already acknowledged earlier on, marriage is a very, very unique thing, and that's what's been so challenging as I've been thinking about this word, this label, and the legal contract behind it, and in the past how we have viewed it as an American society, and the reason why we viewed it in that way, it's very unique, and so I definitely would just say, look, for a secular society, I would prefer for them to say, we're going to establish something new now. We're going to emphasize civil unions, and if you desire to speak of yourself as married or whatever, then, in your pocket of your state or your pocket of people that you want to refer to yourself as, go for it. And even if, to me, that would make... I'm okay with that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I remember when in 2000 when this issue was being debated in California where I was living at the time, I wrote an op-ed for my undergrad school newspaper arguing basically sort of something very similar, arguing for the complete abolition of marriage as a legal institution. And it's like a lot of things I wrote in that time, I look back on, I think I was perhaps a little bit more impetuous, a little more angry, I suppose, than I am nowadays. And it's always weird, looking back on stuff that you wrote, a decade or more ago. But I think that, it is interesting because you can find common cause there between libertarians, between some radical conservatives who want to do, like Mitch said, want to abolish marriage to save it from the homosexuals, and as well, you can also find common cause with the anti-assimilationists and a bunch of other groups like that. So I mean, maybe what I said earlier about there not being the sort of political will there, maybe that's too hasty. Maybe the problem just is that it hasn't had a real champion. So, between 2000 and 2012, the numbers on the gay marriage issue have shifted considerably. Maybe 10, 12 years from now, there will be that kind of political momentum against the entire institution of marriage. So, who knows?
And look, Garrett, I think America is going to hell in a handbasket in general, and it has nothing to do. Yeah, it has nothing to do with gay marriage. It has to do with our society in general, and how so many things. The fact is that we're not. I mean, when we look at numbers when we have less than 20% of the population having more than 50% of the children, and I'm assuming they're being born into situations of poverty, and being exposed to environments that we could solve. Like people could adopt. People could actually go out and go into the ghettos and build relationships and invite people into their homes and establish relationships, but we don't. We don't. We segment ourselves off. We create neighborhoods of the middle class and the rich and the wealthy, and then we let all the low income, poor people fight it out and duel it out,
Yeah.
not realizing that they're
Gentrification is a real problem, and I think it's an unaddressed problem.
Yeah.
And I think, and so I think you're very wise, I think, to draw attention to that. And I think I would also hasten to add that more sex ed and better sex ed, I think, would help with that as well. But we're going to perhaps a conversation for another day. But I mean, it's just, I think it's kind of strange because I don't know. I guess I'm more of an optimist. I mean, we certainly have a lot of problems, but we've always had a lot of problems. I mean, I look at things like the evolving stance on gay marriage, and I think that and homosexuality in general, and that to me I see as a positive sign. And in the same way that I think our evolving stance on race and gender is a positive sign. But we have problems with poverty, gentrification. We still have problems with race and with gender. But I see us as generally, I think, moving in the right direction to address, maybe not solve, but to at least minimize many of these problems. So I'm something of an optimist, actually.
I'm not. Are there things about our society to be optimistic about? Certainly so, but it seems to me the growing trends in our society, when we look at the stats, when we consider the role of technology and the potential negative effects this can have on people's view of sexuality and relationships, and even more so, the access of things like pornography to children, and how 80 to 90% of them are viewing it when they're between the ages of 11 and 14. I think these are some very significant problems that as a society we have yet to face. In addition to this, the growing reality that if procreation is not something as a society that we find to be of great value, as people tend to, in the middle upper class, tend not to. What happens when we have a segment of the population who are very religious and they represent ideologies that are very conflicting to the American dream, the American ideology? Is there a potential problem here in the horizon? I don't know. I mean, it's just stuff to think about, I guess. Yeah,
and perhaps we should have a conversation about pornography some other day, because that would be another topic to talk about. And yeah, you're right. There are problems, and will be problems, and always have been problems about religious subcultures and other non-religious subcultures, and how to somehow balance the sort of their rights and entitlements versus the general well-being. But if you flash back 200 years ago, we were owning people. You want to talk about rights of oppressed minorities? That's something that we've come a long way. There's still,
that's true, but we have come a long way. The question it wasn't whether or not we've come a long way. It's the question of how do I foresee the future. I'm not terribly optimistic. Interestingly enough, I was actually in a conversation with a friend of mine who happens to be atheist a couple weeks ago here in Boise, and he actually said the same thing. He actually said that he felt that America was not actually going in a very optimistic direction,
my wife is convinced the human race is doomed. She does not smile on our prospect as a species. It's not just America. She just thinks the entire planet is screwed. We talk about that a fair bit.
And I would tend to agree with her. Yeah.
Yeah. It's I don't claim to know how to see the future. So it could go any way.
But this is what's important, Gary. I mean, I think conversations like this is what's important, because I read, when you posted up your video, I read some of those comments, and I see within those comments, despite the progress, there are people that hate these sorts of conversations. They despise the fact that either one of us would actually take time to have a courteous conversation, because they don't consider our opponents worthy of courtesy. And those are the sort of people that I think are a plight to humanity, because they are the ones that make so many challenges, because they are against the pursuit of courteous, articulate, passionate argumentation and debate. And I just hate that. And I hate it that I see that in our politics too. So, I mean, obviously this is a different topic, but thank you for being here, though. That's, I mean, based on that, thank you for taking the time.
And you're welcome, and thank you too. Yeah, I think that the level of civility and discourse has been very good, and I've had a very good time. But I was along those same lines. I think it was during the 2004 election. I coined something of a mantra that I rather liked, which I can try to sort of summarize. It was to the effect of that I think the most important divide in the country is not between red states and blue states, conservatives and liberals, Republicans and Democrats. The most important divide is between people who are willing to critically reevaluate their own presuppositions and those who are not willing to critically reevaluate their own presuppositions. That is the fundamentally unhealthy division in our country, regardless of how else you fall on those other issues.
I love it. That's exactly. Yes. Now I think. Do you have a second? I don't know if anyone had some questions. I know earlier someone had a question, or how are you doing?
I have a little bit more time. We'll do some Q&A if people have anything they want to ask.
Okay.
Proportional response. Yes.
Greg has a question. What does it matter if I'm a virgin? Who cares? Even if I was a virgin in sexual intercourse, I'm certainly not one in my mind.
You know, Isaac Newton died a virgin.
There you go.
That's one of those strange pieces of trivia. He said that was his greatest life's accomplishment, was lifelong celibacy. And yeah, I don't know if Kant, for sure Kant died a virgin, but it certainly wouldn't surprise me given his sexual ethics. So, Beethoven died a virgin, really? That strikes me as odd. I mean, just because Beethoven was, well, he was Beethoven. I mean, I don't know. Yeah.
He was very sexual.
Very, yeah, okay. Yes, Mitch, he actually did. He said that on his deathbed, his greatest life's accomplishment was not the universal law of gravitation, wasn't the thermodynamics, wasn't calculus, wasn't any of that stuff. It was lifelong celibacy. Well,
all right, Greg, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Yep, I got you.
I wanted to come on Skype and ask this because it's a little bit of a lengthy thing. It would take a long time to type, so I'll ask and then let you go for it and everything, or even off the call if you guys want to line up something else. But my question was this, and we had alluded to this before I had asked, but I wanted to make sure that we were having the same conversation. So I want to make sure about this, Jack. You said earlier that your argument isn't against gays having the equal rights, but it was for maintaining the status quo, because that's what we deemed in society is.
Well, I didn't use the word status quo. So I'm always very precise on the sort of words that I try to use. But the argument was that basically it was just the conversation was to sort of feel my way through some of these argumentations, not as though I'm actually presenting or have ever presented any of these. Basically, the argument is that marriage should be between a man, should remain as a man and woman for the various reasons that we talked about or sort of brought up, and that everyone else, who are in some sort of relational model should be given, whatever rights are required for them to be able to take care of the well-being of whoever they're with.
Okay, but in that, though, that still means people in the other relations or types of relationships, including gay marriage, wouldn't have the name of marriage.
Right.
Okay, then the question that I had is what I was trying to type out, but it was taking a long time when it first happened, and there was some other stuff going on with this. There's real world examples of this. For example, let's say there's a boys' club, a men's club, a club that is exclusively for men. Now, arguing to continue that because of tradition, the way that it's built up, is simultaneously denying women the right to be included into that club. And you can make the argument that you're not arguing against that and not trying to deny them the place in there, which would be, in this analogy, the title of marriage, but by maintaining what I say status quo, or you say that it is. Currently, in that men's club, it doesn't imply it, it actually requires to discriminate against the women not being able to be admitted.
We do this all the time. Our society does this all the time. There's abundance of we all argue for something to be the case. And this is for argument. This is about argumentation, how you approach the conversation. When you look at language, it sort of can make the burden on your point greater or lesser. So arguing for something to be the case in a positive way can be sometimes an easier task than arguing against why something should be excluded. And
I get that. But my point is that if arguing for the case, for it to remain the same, requires that someone else doesn't get the right, or it's not like you're doing the job of arguing against the women coming into this thing, or for gays to have marriage, but what you are arguing is requiring that. I think my point earlier was, if you have no good reason, if there is no justifiable reason, even if you have a reason, but it's not justifiable enough to continue the discrimination of, say, women outside of that group, then you shouldn't allow women inside the group because it is wrong.
We do this all the time in our society. We do this all the time.
Yes, I agree we do this all the time. But the question is it right?
And that depends. And that depends. It depends on, and you know what? It depends on the cultural, societal mindset of what is appropriate discrimination, because we do it all the time. We discriminate all the time, and we justify it for varying reasons that 20 years ago, it wouldn't be... 20 years ago, we wouldn't consider that in downtown Seattle, they would have buses that depict smokers as consuming dead rats, and that's what you would be kissing if you kissed a smoker. But if you go to downtown Seattle, you will see buses now that clearly go about depicting smokers in ways as being sick. You smoke? Oh, kissing you is like kissing someone who is eating a dead rat. And we justify that as a society. So why do we justify it now versus 20 years ago? Partly because we understand more the implications, the consequences of smoking. But even understanding the consequences doesn't mean that we have to go about stigmatizing the population or group who does smoke, right? But they've justified stigmatizing this population group because they feel it's in the better interest of society for them to stigmatize the smokers, because that way fewer people are going to smoke if we can make smokers look like they're eating dead rats. That's essentially what the media, propaganda is right now. We've justified this by and large. So, it depends on the circumstance and situation. And the fact is, you can go into one state where they could certainly, when you talk about justification, their justification is based upon a whole variety of issues.
Looks like we lost Greg.
Oh, where is he? He should be back on.
Greg, you there? No.
Let me hang up on him real quick, and then I'll call him back again.
Okay.
Are you there?
I guess not.
All right. Wait, are you there, Greg?
Hello?
Yes.
Oh, there we are. Okay. I have no idea what happened. it went dead there for a second. Okay, so you were talking. I could see on the screen there, and I couldn't hear you. I was trying to get it back and everything. I guess I know you were trying to record this, so I guess I'll just listen to the recording about later on, and I'll let somebody else hop on.
Yeah, well, I mean, basically the point was, you know, as a society, we justify discriminating for various reasons, and those justifications, those reasons we give may be justified now, but 10 years from now we may change our mind. So, I mean, it really, is it so black and white as we would like for it to be? Not really. I mean, when you really look at the history of our civilization, it's not as black and white as we look at history as being today. Like, we look at history and we're like, yeah, that was wrong. But today...
I don't think it's nearly as gray as some people think it is. It really comes down to the question of, for me, when I started deciding this at a very young age, was like, are there people out there who have rights that other people don't? And the answer to that is yes. And I talked about that in a video I made recently, that it is discrimination. It's just that some people think that there's a good reason for the discrimination. Other people say that they don't. And once I found that the opposition to gay marriage was so, in my opinion, weak, and all the great points that they can make were so easily defeated, that it is still a time, even now, where there's a population of individuals who are Americans, who should have rights, and especially, which is also, of course, a conundrum whenever you talk about conservatives being against this so much, because they believe in rights and they scream about Constitution, but they seem to, take an acceptance to this one. But regardless of that, is that you still have a population of people that, for no good reason, are denied rights.
Okay, it's more. I mean, Greg, I would argue it's more complicated than that, and this is part of the frustration. Is like, we can't get anywhere if we look at our opposition and we say to them, you have no good reasons, without even having that conversation with them. I mean, that's part of the reason why I had this with Garrett, because in actuality, I think our conversation was a decent back and forth. There were certainly things that I can go back and think about, and I honestly think that if I could present a more articulate case, given time and thought, on the areas of contention. I mean, it's not an impossible task. So the reality is...
And I'm not saying that you didn't have a good, courteous conversation. I get that, but I'm 36 years old, and I've been debating and fighting this stuff for 18 years. I have still yet to hear a good argument. Well, first of all, I think we weren't getting into the religious debates here, but 90 to 95% of the arguments do come from religious bases and moralities.
Right,
but
and that's the problem. Even if you
take those, or even if you remove those and go through the conversations that we've had today, stuff that's not based on religion, I still see the reasonings as being, and I'm not trying to say that you are and that this conversation wasn't, but the reasonings are still so shallow. At some points,
I'm not surprised by that, though, because here's the thing: is reasoning in the form of argumentation in our society, and this is over the course of history, is largely dependent upon the audience. So when we talk about reasonings and justification, and you say this is shallow, this is largely based upon a perception of how you think certain, certain concepts of things such as of equality and justice should be played out in our civilization. So I'm not surprised that someone may hear reasons and think and say to themselves, "Oh, those are shallow." Because to me, it's not so much about whether or not I walk away saying those are shallow. It's a matter about to me, it's the real-time conversation like Garrett and I had, where we contend with each other, giving real-life examples and scenarios, and we delve into the ins and outs, the pros and the cons. We delve into the nuances of it, and we find at the end of it, perhaps it isn't so black and white maybe as we would have anticipated, although we still disagree. But to evaluate it just simply to say it's shallow, well, certainly we do, and there's a place for us doing that in discourse, but I don't think that the reasons I gave were all that shallow. I think that they are actually potentially a very tenable position that one could make and elaborate upon, and not actually go against the rights of someone's sexual orientation. I think that That doesn't have to be either or. It can be both. Someone can say, yes, I want marriage to be one man, one woman, but you know what? I hate the fact that my gay friend is discriminated against on all these areas. I mean, it doesn't, so.
And I'll get off of this, but just asking a question based on what you just said. Out of all the, and not arguments or points, whatever you want to call it, either arguments or just discussion, on your side of it, which one of those arguments that you use would you feel would be the pinnacle of that, the strongest one that would actually be one that would give people pause and would be the least shallow, would be the deepest point?
To me, I wouldn't approach it in the terms of what would, I mean, we oftentimes we look for one particular point, but I think with issues of policy and the secular government, it's not just one primary point necessarily.
Oh, no. Yeah. I understand. I'm just trying to get an example of what you're trying to say whenever you are explaining that it's not black and white, there's gray areas. Out of the ones that you talked about today, which one do you think would the argument that should warrant the most thought? After this for you, which one of these is going to give you the most thought,
Well, one of the things that I'm going to, think about later on is, for example, this notion of relational models that are not within the legal contract. So, like these friends and these sisters that Greg brought up, who exist in these relationships that are not sexual in any means, by any means, and yet we certainly don't consider. We wouldn't say, with reference to them, separate but equal. We wouldn't say that, because we understand that but one could say that, though. One could say, look, these two people live together, they're not sexually involved, separate but equal. Now, in that context, well, yeah, it is very separate. I mean, married people, two people who are a husband and a wife, we understand sort of a general understanding of that relationship. That is separate. That's very separate sort of relationship. And they're equal in terms of their rights as individuals, perhaps not so equal, though, in terms of the rights that the state grants them, or the ease of access, actually, that the state grants them with regards to things like visitation, for example. So, I mean, there are exceptions to this notion of separate but equal, for example. I mean, and I think that was something I'm going to walk away and be like, yeah, I think there was something there I hadn't thought about before the conversation, which is why I love talking live, because I think about something that I hadn't considered before. And so, I mean, I think that there's potential for someone to advocate something. That I would say the challenges, as Garrett's already presented, are what are the primary reasons for not allowing for other relational models to be inclusive in the legal contract that we label marriage. And I think one of those is certainly going to be procreation. But there's certainly weakness to that, but I don't think it's as weak as perhaps people might think. Hello?
Okay, I guess we lost Greg. I don't know if anyone else wanted to ask a question or.
Greg, what is up with your dude? Crappy internet.
You're right, the world is going to hell. We can't even sustain.
Yeah, I wasn't even going to answer. I typed in there, yeah, I don't know, I lost you. I think I need to update Skype or something like that. I just keep losing you once in a while.
Oh, mercy.
I don't know. But I don't want to, yeah. I had other questions, but I'll just type them over to you, Jack, in YouTube. I don't want to take away if someone else wants to come in here and ask questions. So I'll hop off here.
Yeah, I probably should get going pretty soon, but I guess if anyone else has any last questions for me or anything like that before I split.
I think I actually have a question here. Let me see. I'd written down some stuff.
but it's not that gay people are poor. It's actually quite the opposite. Gay people tend to socioeconomically be on the upper end of the spectrum, so they're less likely to be poor.
What do you think, Sisyphus, of the sort of mantra that that gets tossed out there, that what is, when someone says how is me being married to this person harming you? So if a gay couple says, how is me getting married going to harm you? What do you think about that?
I see why they say that, and it sort of depends, I think, on the context in which it's said. I mean, if they're encountering someone who's making an argument that says, that says precisely that I will be harmed, my marriage will be harmed if we let gay people get married, then that response is a perfectly acceptable response. How? How will it harm me? Spell all the details. So in that context, I think it's a good response. In the abstract, it seems to assume that the only reason why you can oppose something is because it will harm yourself, and I don't think that's true. I think there can be reasons to oppose legislation or social changes, even if it's not based necessarily on harm. There is something of I guess a utilitarian impulse. I think it's somewhat oversimplified to say, well, as long as it doesn't harm anybody, then it's okay. And I don't think that's completely true. So. It depends on the context, is the bottom line, I guess.
Right, because, and I'm sitting there and this is one of those things that, because it's such an emotional topic, and it's really sad that we don't see more people engaging in reasoned conversation from opposing perspectives, because I hear a lot of those sort of emotional things. I mean, like when I posted up my video, people, and this is typical of YouTube, so I'm not surprised by it, but people, and I get that it's emotional, their response is not all that rational. So it's as though you've got two sides engaging in very emotional, not so well reasoned positions, Yeah,
I mean, I think you have to start from a position of understanding that, whichever side of a controversial issue you're on, if it's something that you're invested in, if it's something you have an emotional stake in, when someone challenges that, I think the knee-jerk reaction is going to be defensive, to be passionate, to jump out and attack the person who's threatening your position. So I certainly understand that. I've certainly done that too. I have had that same sort of knee-jerk emotional reaction. And not engage in a sort of calm, rational manner. And I think sometimes that is an appropriate reaction, depending somewhat on the circumstances.
Because it seems like this conversation, like with regards to marriage, even me wanting to sort of prod this idea that it should be a man and woman based upon non-religious reasons, has received comments that basically are, you're a bigot, you endorse discrimination, and I'm very fascinated, because to me it lacks the sort of depth and reasoning that I think is going to be the best for us, as a civilization. But at the same time, I understand emotionally why they might respond. But just because someone wants to prod and question the establishment, I mean, for example, if marriage, as I assume it will at some point, most states will pass legislation to allow it, or the government, whatever. When we begin to prod that, if people do later on, I mean, are we going to resort to calling everyone a bigot just because they want to question the establishment, and they want to think differently than the established norm of secular society? I don't know.
Okay, I'll respond to that, but quickly before I do, I want to interject a response to Fox K91, who's asking this question about what other basis can there be for establishing policy other than the fact that it will harm someone. And there's, if you're a utilitarian, if all you care about is harm, then there isn't. But I'm not a utilitarian. I care about other things. I care about, for example, notions of equity and justice. So those things matter to me as well, not just whether or not something harms someone. So will this policy harm someone is an important question. Will this policy be equitable? Will it be fair? Is another important question, and those two things don't necessarily correlate. I hope that addresses your point, Fox. Now, Jack, back to your point. Yeah, I think part of the reason why I think, sociologically speaking, psychologically speaking, the reason why a lot of people have that reaction, oh, you're challenging this, you must be a bigot, is because, historically there have been lots of trends of, people trying to muddy the water or provide coverage by saying things like, well, I'm just asking questions, I'm not saying that we should reinstitute race-based slavery, I'm just asking a question about it. And it's for many people, it's insincere, and it's done as a tactic and as a strategy to try and institutionalize bigotry or to protect the status quo rather than as an earnest, honest attempt to have a conversation. And so because of that history, because of that tendency, a lot of people, I think, when they see people ask questions that are politically sensitive like that, they get that defensive reaction. A similar thing comes to my mind when people say things like, could there, ask questions, could there be an IQ basis, IQ difference between different racial groups or different genders? A lot of people, if that question is even asked, they get defensive and take umbrage. And a lot of people say, hey, it's a fair question. It's an empirical question. Why don't we go out there and study it and look? We don't need to be so defensive about it. And I think the reason why people are so defensive about it is precisely because, historically speaking, most people who have asked questions like that have not been asking in good faith. They have been doing it as a ploy, as a ruse, as cover to try to push a bigoted agenda. And they're just trying to muddy the waters and provide themselves or others with cover when they do that. I don't know you terribly well, Jack, but I think I know you well enough to know that that's not what you're doing and that's not where you're at. And I feel comfortable in taking you at face value when you say that you are wanting to have an open conversation, which is why I feel comfortable having such an open conversation. But other people, perhaps who don't know you as well, or perhaps they do know you, but they have a more negative opinion of you, have that sort of reaction. I can understand it. So I don't think it's the correct reaction, but I understand why people have that reaction. And again, you can say the same thing for people reacting on the other side of the spectrum as well.
Yeah, no, that's certain. That's a great explanation. Yeah, there's definitely that emotional component, especially if someone's, like with many of my friends who happen to be atheists, there's a lot of emotion involved sometimes with our discussion, and you just have to. That's where it's important to build trust and honesty, even with people you disagree with fundamentally. Yeah, and epileptic is right to get to. This happens on both sides of the fence. It's not just it's not simply something that people on the right do. People on the left can perform similar sorts of rhetorical political tactics as well. Yeah. Garrett, thank you so much. Yeah, this has been a lot of fun. I very much appreciate the invite and the exchange of ideas. Would you be willing to come back again sometime? Absolutely. Just let me know if you got a topic and the time, and we can set it up. That'd be awesome, because I definitely got some other topics out there now too that we'll have to do. Yeah. Well, thank you everybody also for tuning in and for asking questions and so forth. Check out his channel. Let me type in your channel here. If anyone doesn't know already. And did you is this recorded? Did you record this? Yes, I've got the video here and the audio. Excellent. So, you're going to post it on your channel? Yes, I can upload it to my channel. All right. When you do that, I'll copy it and mirror it and put it on mine as well. Fabulous. All right. Thanks a lot, Jack. It's good talking to you. Yes, ditto. Thanks, Garrett. Peace out. Good night. Peace out, homie. You too.